The courthouse clock struck noon as Emma Collins stood before Judge Harrison Blake, her swollen belly pressing against the witness stand. Her calloused hands trembled as she held up a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with meticulous entries documenting years of exploitation. Marcus Whitfield sat in the front row, his weathered face etched with determination, a loaded Colt revolver visible beneath his coat. The judge's gavel gleamed like a weapon in the autumn sunlight streaming through tall windows. Tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Your Honor. Emma's voice carried across the packed courtroom. This ledger contains proof that Judge Blake has been selling women into indentured servitude, forcing them into situations no decent person would tolerate. Her green eyes never wavered from Blake's furious glare, including the night he told me I was hired as a housekeeper but would be expected to share his bed. The gallery erupted in shocked murmurs. Blake's hand moved toward the pistol at his waist, but Marcus was already standing, his own weapon drawn with the practiced ease of a man who'd survived too many range wars. I wouldn't, Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos like winter wind through pine trees. Sheriff Tom Bradley stepped forward, his badge catching the light, uncertainty written across his young face. Marcus, put the gun down. This is a court of law. Marcus's steel-gray eyes never left Blake's face. Sometimes the law needs a little help remembering what justice looks like. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring, every person in the courtroom holding their breath, waiting to see if this moment would end in blood or truth. But this confrontation had been building for months, since the day Marcus Whitfield first encountered Emma Collins on the muddy streets of Copper Creek, desperate and alone, carrying a secret that would change both their lives forever. Marcus Whitfield owned everything the eye could see from the wraparound porch of his Double Diamond Ranch house. 15,000 acres of prime Montana Territory grazing land stretched toward the Pine Ridge Mountains, dotted with the finest Hereford cattle this side of the Continental Divide. His ranch house stood like a monument to success, 3 stories of hand-hewn timber and imported glass, furnished with pieces shipped by rail from San Francisco and Denver. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. A library held leather-bound volumes most frontier towns had never seen. Yet Marcus moved through these rooms like a ghost haunting his own life. At 34, he possessed the kind of wealth that made men tip their hats and women lower their eyes in respect. But comfort felt foreign against his skin. The house echoed with emptiness that no amount of fine furniture could fill. Servants came and went with seasonal regularity, unable to penetrate the wall of silence he'd built around his daily existence. He took his meals alone at a dining table that could seat 12, reading cattle reports and market prices while his food grew cold on china plates. The morning routine never varied. Marcus rose before dawn, dressed in work clothes despite having a foreman capable of handling every aspect of ranch operations, and walked the property until the sun climbed high enough to burn the frost from autumn grass. He checked fence lines that didn't need checking, counted cattle that Jake Morrison had already tallied, and spoke only when necessity demanded words. By evening, he returned to his study, poured 3 fingers of Kentucky bourbon, and reviewed ledger books that showed his continued prosperity with the emotional investment of a man calculating the weather. This particular October morning carried the sharp promise of an early winter. Marcus finished his inspection rounds and rode toward Copper Creek for monthly supplies, a task he could have delegated but preferred to handle personally. The 30-minute ride gave him time to think, though his thoughts rarely strayed beyond immediate concerns of feed costs and cattle prices. The town appeared gradually through morning mist, its collection of wooden buildings and dirt streets representing civilization's tenuous foothold in territory that had been wilderness just 20 years earlier. Copper Creek served the surrounding ranches and mining claims with practical efficiency. Blake's trading post anchored the main street, flanked by the Silver Dollar Saloon, Dr. Rebecca Stone's medical practice, and a handful of other establishments that met frontier necessities without pretense. The Frontier Hotel provided accommodation for traveling businessmen and territorial officials, while St. Matthew's Church offered spiritual comfort to those who sought it. Marcus conducted his business with minimal conversation, purchasing flour, coffee, ammunition, and other supplies with the same methodical precision he applied to every aspect of his life. He was loading sacks of grain into his wagon when raised voices drew his attention toward the hotel. Two men in expensive suits stood over a young woman who knelt in the muddy street, her belongings scattered around her like fallen leaves. Her condition was immediately apparent, even beneath a worn traveling dress. She was perhaps 6 months pregnant, her face pale with exhaustion, and something deeper than physical fatigue. One of the men held papers in his hand, speaking in tones that carried the authority of legal documents and social position. Contract clearly states payment in advance for room and board, the taller man was saying. Marcus recognized him as Vincent Cross, Judge Blake's business partner and frequent visitor to territorial meetings. No payment, no accommodation, simple business transaction. The woman struggled to gather her scattered possessions, her movements careful and deliberate despite obvious distress. A carpet bag lay open in the mud, revealing the meager contents of someone who owned little beyond hope and determination. "Please," she said, her voice carrying quiet dignity despite her circumstances. "I can work for my keep. I'm experienced with household management, cooking, cleaning. I just need somewhere safe until my baby comes." Cross exchanged a meaningful look with his companion, a lean man Marcus didn't recognize, but whose expensive clothes and soft hands marked him as another town official or businessman. "Well now," Cross said, his tone shifting to something that made Marcus's skin crawl. "There might be arrangements we could discuss."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Private arrangements that wouldn't require advance payment. The woman's face hardened with understanding. She'd heard such offers before, Marcus realized. Probably many times since her condition had become apparent. "No thank you," she said firmly, rising to her feet with effort. "I'll find honest work elsewhere." "Honest work?" Cross laughed, the sound carrying across the street like breaking glass. "Look around, girl. This is frontier territory. Decent families don't hire women in your condition. Raises too many questions about moral character. But some men might be willing to overlook certain irregularities in exchange for appropriate gratitude." Marcus found himself walking toward the confrontation before conscious thought entered the equation. Something about the woman's composed refusal in the face of degrading propositions had penetrated the emotional numbness that surrounded his daily existence. Her strength reminded him of qualities he'd once admired, once sought to protect, before life had taught him that protection was often impossible and caring led only to greater pain. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came from owning most of the territory surrounding Copper Creek. Cross and his companion turned, their expressions shifting from predatory confidence to careful calculation. Everyone in town knew Marcus Whitfield's reputation for fair dealing and his distaste for men who preyed on the vulnerable. "Mr. Whitfield," Cross said, attempting jovial familiarity that fooled no one. "Just conducting some business with this young lady. Nothing that concerns ranch operations." Marcus ignored Cross entirely, addressing the woman directly. "I'm looking for household help at my ranch. The position includes private quarters, meals, and fair wages. If you're interested in honest work, we could discuss terms." The woman studied his face with eyes that had learned to recognize deception through hard experience. She saw something there that satisfied her cautious evaluation, because she nodded slowly. "What kind of household help?" "Cooking, cleaning, general house management. The work isn't difficult, but the house is large, and I prefer things done properly. Room and board plus $30 a month, paid weekly." The amount was generous by frontier standards, more than most ranch hands earned, and everyone present understood the implications of such an offer. Cross stepped closer, his friendly mask slipping to reveal something uglier underneath. "Now Marcus, you don't want to get involved in this situation. Girl's got no references, no family connections, could be diseased, could be criminal. You're too trusting for your own good. I appreciate your concern for my welfare," Marcus replied, his tone suggesting the opposite. "But I'm quite capable of making my own hiring decisions." He turned back to the woman. "What's your name?" "Emma Collins," she replied, her chin lifting with the pride of someone who'd never begged despite desperate circumstances. "I've managed households in Denver and Salt Lake City. I can provide excellent service if given the opportunity." Then gather your things, Miss Collins. I'll take you out to the ranch so you can see the position for yourself. Marcus helped her collect her scattered belongings, noting the careful way she moved and the quality of items that suggested better circumstances in her past. A silver locket at her throat, fine needlework on a pillowcase, a leather-bound book of poetry marked her as educated despite her current situation. Cross grabbed Marcus's arm as they prepared to leave. "You're making a mistake, Whitfield. This girl's trouble, mark my words. When she causes problems, don't come looking for sympathy from the town council." Marcus looked down at Cross's hand on his arm until the man released his grip. "I'll keep that in mind," he said evenly. "Though I've found that men who profit from others' desperation rarely offer reliable advice about character." The ride to the Double Diamond Ranch passed in thoughtful silence. Emma sat beside Marcus on the wagon seat, her hands folded over her rounded belly, watching the landscape unfold with the careful attention of someone evaluating a potential sanctuary. The ranch house appeared gradually through stands of pine and aspen, its size and obvious prosperity clearly impressing her despite attempts to maintain neutral expression. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, as they approached the main house. "You must be very proud of what you've built here." Marcus considered her words while he helped her down from the wagon. Pride seemed the wrong term for his relationship with the ranch. He'd built it through determination and hard work, certainly, but the accomplishment felt hollow when experienced alone. "It serves its purpose," he replied, leading her toward the front entrance. "Let me show you the house so you can decide if the position suits your needs." The interior's grandeur struck Emma speechless for several moments. She'd worked in prosperous homes before, but nothing approaching the Double Diamond scale and appointed luxury. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rooms that could have graced any mansion in Denver or San Francisco. Yet she noticed the signs of neglect that spoke to the absence of proper household management. Dust gathered in corners, silver needed polishing, and the general atmosphere suggested a house maintained by occasional hired help, rather than consistent care. "The previous housekeeper left 2 months ago," Marcus explained, noting her professional assessment of the situation. "I've been managing with part-time help from town, but it's not adequate for proper maintenance." Emma moved through the rooms with growing confidence, her trained eye cataloging tasks and possibilities. "This house deserves better than part-time attention," she agreed. "How many rooms total?" 16 rooms, including servant quarters on the 3rd floor. Library, study, formal dining room, parlor, and kitchen on the main level. 5 bedrooms upstairs, including the master suite. Marcus paused at the base of the grand staircase. "You'd have the housekeeper's room on the 2nd floor. Private bath, sitting area, everything you'd need for comfort." They climbed to the 2nd floor, where Marcus opened a door near the back stairs. The housekeeper's quarters were spacious and well appointed, with windows overlooking the ranch's western pastures and the mountains beyond. A comfortable bed, writing desk, and upholstered chair created a living space that exceeded Emma's expectations for employee accommodation. The private bathroom was a luxury she hadn't enjoyed since leaving Denver under circumstances she preferred not to remember. "This is very generous," Emma said, running her hand along the smooth surface of the writing desk. "More comfortable than many places I've paid rent to occupy." Marcus watched her careful exploration of the space, noting how she unconsciously placed a protective hand over her belly when examining the room's safety features. The gesture stirred something in his chest that he'd thought permanently buried. "When is your baby due?" "Late January or early February," Emma replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I understand if that affects your decision about hiring me. Most employers prefer to avoid complications related to childbirth and infant care. Do you have family, someone who could assist when your time comes?" Marcus asked, though her presence in Copper Creek alone suggested the answer. Emma's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "No family. But Dr. Stone seems competent, and I've attended enough births to understand what's required. I won't be a burden during my confinement, and I can continue working until very near my time." Marcus nodded slowly, making calculations that had nothing to do with household efficiency. This woman needed security more than he needed perfect service, and something about her dignity in desperate circumstances reminded him of qualities he'd once valued above personal comfort. The position is yours if you want it. We can discuss specific duties and arrange for anything you need to be comfortable here. Relief flickered across Emma's features before she composed herself again. Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. I promise you'll have no cause to regret this decision. I'll earn every dollar you pay me. I'm sure you will, Marcus replied, though he was beginning to suspect that Emma Collins would bring more to the Double Diamond Ranch than efficient household management. For the first time in years, the echo of his own footsteps in empty rooms might be joined by sounds that suggested life rather than mere existence. As evening approached, Emma settled into her new quarters while Marcus returned to his study and the familiar routine of bourbon and cattle reports. But the house felt different somehow, less like a monument to solitary achievement and more like a home where people might actually live. Through the walls, he could hear Emma moving about her room, unpacking her few belongings and preparing for sleep in her first secure shelter in months. That night, Marcus slept better than he had in years, though he couldn't identify exactly why rest came easier in a house that now sheltered someone other than himself. Outside, autumn wind rattled the windows and carried the promise of winter's approach, but within the walls of the Double Diamond Ranch house, two people who had learned to expect little from life began to discover that safety shared was somehow more substantial than comfort enjoyed alone. Part 2. The broken man. Marcus Whitfield had not always been a man who measured his days in cattle counts and ledger entries. Time moved differently before the war, before the fever, before the silence that settled over his life, like dust over abandoned furniture. He woke each morning at 4:30, not from discipline, but because sleep brought dreams he preferred to avoid. Coffee brewed in a kitchen meant for family meals while he dressed in clothes that marked him as successful but not necessarily alive. The Double Diamond Ranch represented more than financial achievement. Every fence post had been set with hands that once shook with purpose. Every pasture cleared by muscles that remembered working toward something greater than mere survival. But prosperity felt hollow when celebrated alone, wealth meaningless when no one shared its benefits. Marcus moved through his morning routine with mechanical precision, checking tasks that competent employees could handle, avoiding the main house, except when business demanded his presence. His study served as refuge from rooms that echoed with absence. Leather chairs arranged for conversations that never occurred, dining settings that remained unused, bedrooms that gathered dust like forgotten hopes. A portrait above the fireplace showed a younger Marcus beside a woman with gentle eyes and auburn hair, her hand resting on the shoulder of a boy perhaps 3 years old. The painting had faced the wall for 2 years now, too painful to view but too precious to remove. The war had taken 5 years from his life, years that should have been spent building something lasting with Catherine and their son Thomas. Instead, he'd marched through Virginia mud and Tennessee rain, fighting for causes that seemed increasingly abstract as friends died around him. Letters from home arrived sporadically, carrying news of cattle prices and weather, of Thomas learning to ride, and Catherine managing the ranch with competence that made his absence both possible and unbearable. He returned in 1875 to find his family in the town cemetery, victims of scarlet fever that swept through the territory while he pursued Confederate raiders through Arkansas mountains. Catherine had died first, holding Thomas until her strength failed. Then the boy had followed 3 days later. The headstones were simple granite marbles that conveyed nothing about laughter in the kitchen, or stories read by lamplight, or dreams shared in whispered conversations after dark. The ranch prospered under his relentless attention to detail, as if success might somehow justify the cost of achieving it. He hired the best foremen, purchased prize breeding stock, expanded his holdings until the Double Diamond became the largest operation in 3 counties. Neighbors spoke his name with respect tinged by wariness, recognizing wealth and capability, while sensing the emotional distance that kept him separate from normal human connections. Women in Copper Creek made subtle overtures, recognizing his eligibility despite his withdrawn nature. Widows brought casseroles under the pretense of Christian charity. Unmarried daughters appeared at church socials when his presence was expected. But Marcus maintained polite distance from romantic possibilities, unwilling to risk the vulnerability that caring required. Better to live safely alone than to expose his heart to loss again. Jake Morrison served as foreman, and the closest thing Marcus allowed to friendship, but even Jake understood the boundaries that governed their relationship. Work could be discussed, ranch business shared, but personal matters remained off limits by unspoken agreement. Jake had tried initially to draw Marcus into town gatherings and social events, but gradually accepted his employer's preference for solitude over community connection. The house itself reflected Marcus's emotional state. Rooms remained exactly as Catherine had arranged them, preserved like museum displays of a life that once flourished within these walls. Her piano stood silent in the parlor, sheet music still open to the last song she'd played. Thomas's toys remained in the nursery, toy soldiers arranged in battle formations that would never be disturbed. The master bedroom became forbidden territory, Marcus relocating to a guest room rather than sleep, where memories might overwhelm it. Carefully maintained defenses. Servants came and went with seasonal regularity, unable to penetrate the atmosphere of perpetual mourning that pervaded the household. Most found employment at friendlier establishments where their efforts were acknowledged with more than polite gratitude and prompt payment. The turnover meant constant training of new help, explaining routines and standards to people who rarely stayed long enough to master their duties properly. Dr. Rebecca Stone had attempted to address his withdrawal during their few interactions, suggesting that grief unexpressed could poison both body and spirit. But Marcus resisted counseling that might weaken the emotional walls protecting him from additional pain. Better to feel nothing than to risk feeling everything again. The numbness that surrounded his daily existence seemed preferable to the alternative of vulnerability and potential loss. His wealth attracted business partnerships and investment opportunities, but Marcus approached these relationships with the same emotional distance that characterized every aspect of his life. Money could be trusted in ways that people could not. Contracts provided security that personal connections seemed unable to offer. Success measured in concrete terms felt safer than happiness measured in moments that could be stolen without warning. The morning routine included inspection of building and equipment that needed no inspection, conversations with employees who understood their jobs better than supervision required, and reviews of financial records that documented prosperity without explaining its purpose. These activities filled hours while avoiding the larger questions about meaning and direction that might lead to dangerous introspection. Evening brought the study, the bourbon, and the careful avoidance of rooms where Catherine's presence lingered strongest. Marcus read agricultural journals and market reports, correspondence from business associates, occasionally books on subjects that demanded intellectual engagement without emotional investment. Technical manuals about breeding and feed management, historical accounts of territorial development, anything that occupied his mind without engaging his heart. The library Catherine had loved remained largely untouched, her bookmark still marking her place in a novel about love conquering impossible odds. Poetry volumes she'd read aloud during winter evenings gathered dust on shelves that once represented shared interests and future discussions. Her reading chair maintained the slight depression her body had created through countless quiet hours, a physical reminder of absence that Marcus found both comforting and unbearable. Sleep came reluctantly, aided by alcohol and exhaustion, but rarely lasted through the night. Dreams brought memories of Catherine's laughter, Thomas's questions about everything from horse behavior to star patterns. Conversations about expanding the ranch and building something lasting for future generations. Waking meant remembering that those future generations would never exist, that the dynasty he'd planned to create would end with his own death. The war had taught him that life could be lost in an instant, that careful planning meant nothing when disease or violence struck without warning. But losing his family while absent, fighting battles that achieved nothing permanent, added guilt to grief in ways that made recovery seem impossible. He should have been present when they needed him, should have ignored duty in favor of love, should have chosen family over abstract concepts of honor and obligation. These regrets circled through his thoughts during solitary hours, creating mental paths worn smooth by repetitive traveling. What if he'd returned earlier? What if he'd brought them to safety elsewhere? What if he'd never left at all? The questions multiplied without producing answers, generating pain without offering resolution or peace. Marcus had constructed his current life as protection against such vulnerability, building routines that required no emotional investment while providing the illusion of purpose. The ranch thrived under his management, but thriving felt mechanical rather than meaningful. Success achieved in isolation meant nothing when no one shared its benefits or understood its cost. Part 3. The catalyst encounter. November wind carried the scent of snow across Copper Creek's main street as Marcus completed his monthly supply run. The wagon rattled with provisions for another month of solitary existence at the Double Diamond. Sacks of flour and coffee arranged with the same methodical precision he applied to every aspect of ranch management. Winter approached with unusual urgency this year, weather patterns suggesting an early and harsh season that would test both livestock and human endurance. The Frontier Hotel bustled with more activity than usual. Several expensive carriages drawn up outside, indicating the presence of territorial officials or business investors. Such gatherings typically preceded changes in local ordinances or the establishment of new commercial ventures. Though Marcus rarely involved himself in town politics beyond protecting his own interests, he preferred to complete his business quickly and return to the privacy of his ranch rather than engage in the social complexities that community involvement required. As he secured the wagon's contents with practiced efficiency, raised voices from the hotel's front entrance drew his attention despite his inclination to avoid other people's difficulties. Two well-dressed men stood over a young woman who had clearly been forcibly removed from the building, her belongings scattered across the muddy street in obvious disarray. Her condition was immediately apparent, even at a distance. Her pregnancy advanced enough to make her situation particularly vulnerable and desperate. Vincent Cross dominated the confrontation with the aggressive confidence of a man accustomed to exercising power over those with fewer resources. His expensive suit and polished boots marked him as someone who profited from frontier commerce while avoiding its physical hardships. Beside him stood a stranger whose soft hands and calculating eyes suggested similar business interests. Probably another territorial official or investor drawn to Copper Creek by opportunities for exploitation disguised as legitimate enterprise. The woman's dignity struck Marcus immediately, her composure in degrading circumstances suggesting strength that had been tested repeatedly but never broken. She knelt carefully in the street, gathering her scattered possessions with deliberate movements that protected both her unborn child and her remaining pride. Her traveling dress showed wear but had once been of good quality, indicating recent prosperity followed by dramatic reversal of fortune. Contract specifies payment in advance, Cross was saying, his voice carrying the authority of legal documents and social position. No exceptions for sob stories or promises of future compensation. Business operates on cash basis, nothing more generous than that. The woman's belongings revealed glimpses of a more comfortable past. A leather satchel contained what appeared to be letters and legal documents, suggesting someone who maintained correspondence and understood bureaucratic processes. Her carpet bag held items of obvious personal value: a silver-framed photograph, fine needlework, a small leather journal with brass clasps. These possessions marked her as educated and probably genteel, before circumstances forced her into current desperation. "Please," she said, her voice carrying quiet strength despite obvious exhaustion. "I'm not asking for charity. I can work to earn my keep. I have experience managing large households, cooking for substantial numbers, maintaining proper standards of cleanliness and organization. Just until my baby arrives and I can make other arrangements." Cross exchanged a meaningful look with his companion, their expressions shifting from businesslike dismissal to something more predatory. The change made Marcus's skin crawl, recognizing the particular form of corruption that preyed on vulnerable women who lacked protection or alternatives. He'd seen similar situations during the war, when desperate circumstances made people susceptible to exploitation by those who profited from others' misfortune. "Well now," Cross said, his tone becoming false and calculating, "perhaps we could discuss alternative arrangements. Private accommodations that wouldn't require advance payment but might involve different forms of compensation. A woman in your condition needs to be practical about available options." The woman's face hardened with understanding that spoke to previous encounters with such propositions. Her pregnancy made her vulnerable to men who assumed desperation would overcome moral principles, but her response demonstrated that necessity had not yet corrupted her character. "Thank you, but no. I'll find honest employment elsewhere, even if it means sleeping outdoors until I do." Honest employment. Cross laughed with genuine amusement at what he considered naive optimism. "Look around, girl. This is frontier territory, not some civilized city where pregnant women find respectable work. Decent families won't hire someone in your condition. Too many questions about moral character and reputation. But some arrangements don't require explanations to wives and neighbors." Marcus found himself walking toward the confrontation before conscious decision entered his thoughts. Something about the woman's quiet refusal to compromise her principles had penetrated the emotional numbness that protected him from caring about strangers' difficulties. Her strength reminded him of qualities he'd once admired in Catherine: the ability to maintain dignity when circumstances offered every excuse for desperation. The distance between his wagon and the hotel entrance felt longer than usual, each step carrying him away from the safety of uninvolvement toward a situation that would require him to take sides in other people's conflicts. But abandoning this woman to Cross's tender mercies felt impossible despite his preference for avoiding complications that might disturb his carefully ordered existence. "Excuse me," Marcus said as he approached the group, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came from owning most of the productive land surrounding Copper Creek. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic of the confrontation, introducing an element that Cross would need to handle more carefully than he'd been managing the woman's resistance. Cross turned with forced joviality that fooled no one present. "Marcus Whitfield, didn't expect to see you in town today. Just conducting some business with this young lady. Nothing that concerns ranch operations or cattle markets, I'm sure." Marcus ignored Cross entirely, addressing the woman directly with courtesy that emphasized the contrast between his behavior and theirs. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. I'm looking for household help at my ranch. The position includes private quarters, regular meals, and fair wages paid weekly. If you're interested in honest work, we could discuss specific terms." The woman studied his face with eyes that had learned to evaluate men's motivations through bitter experience. She'd clearly encountered promises before that led to situations worse than her current desperation. But something in his expression satisfied her careful assessment. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though she maintained the cautious distance of someone who had learned to expect disappointment from apparent kindness. "What kind of household help?" she asked, her voice carrying professional interest mixed with wariness about unstated expectations that might accompany such offers. "Cooking, cleaning, general house management," Marcus replied, maintaining the formal tone that kept their interaction clearly within employment boundaries. "The house is large and requires proper attention from someone who understands maintaining standards. Room and board plus $30 monthly, paid every Friday without exception." The amount was generous by any frontier standard, more than skilled ranch hands earned for dangerous work, and everyone present understood the implications of such an offer. Marcus was either desperate for help or genuinely interested in providing this woman with security rather than exploitation. Cross's expression darkened as he realized his prey might escape through legitimate means. Now Marcus, Cross said, stepping closer with false concern that barely masked his irritation. You don't want to involve yourself in this particular situation. This girl's got no references, no family connections, no proof of good character. Could be diseased, could be criminal, could be running from legal troubles. You're too trusting for your own good, always have been. I appreciate your concern for my welfare, Marcus replied with polite irony that made his actual opinion clear. But I'm quite capable of making my own hiring decisions based on my own evaluation of character and capability. He turned back to the woman, dismissing Cross as effectively as if he'd ceased to exist. What's your name? Emma Collins, she replied, lifting her chin with pride that had survived whatever circumstances had brought her to this desperate situation. I've managed households in Denver and Salt Lake City for families of substantial means. I can provide excellent service if given the opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities. Then gather your belongings, Miss Collins. I'll take you out to the ranch, so you can evaluate the position and living arrangements for yourself. Marcus helped her collect her scattered possessions, noting the careful way she moved to protect her unborn child and the quality of items that suggested better circumstances in her recent past. Cross grabbed Marcus's arm as they prepared to leave, his friendly mask slipping to reveal something uglier and more threatening underneath. You're making a serious mistake, Whitfield. This girl's nothing but trouble waiting to happen. When she causes problems, and she will, don't come looking for sympathy or assistance from the town council or business community. Marcus looked down at Cross's hand on his arm, until the man released his grip, the gesture conveying more threat than words might have accomplished. I'll keep that advice in mind, he said evenly. Though I've found that men who profit from others' desperation rarely offer reliable guidance about character assessment or moral decision-making. The warning carried implications that made Cross step back, recognizing that Marcus Whitfield's reputation for fair dealing was matched by his known willingness to defend his interests against those who might threaten them. Cross had built his influence through intimidation and exploitation, but the Double Diamond Ranch represented power based on legitimate success and community respect that could challenge his schemes if properly motivated. Emma climbed onto the wagon seat with careful dignity, arranging her worn skirts to maintain modesty while settling her belongings securely around her feet. Her relief was carefully controlled but unmistakable, the first genuine security she'd experienced in months evident in the way her shoulders relaxed and her breathing became less shallow. Yet wariness remained in her posture, suggesting previous experiences where apparent rescue had led to different forms of exploitation. The ride toward the Double Diamond Ranch passed in thoughtful silence, both passengers processing the implications of their new arrangement. Emma studied the landscape with obvious appreciation for its beauty, but also with the practical assessment of someone evaluating a potential sanctuary. The vastness of Marcus's holdings became apparent as they traveled, mile after mile of prime grazing land that represented both success and isolation. Your ranch is quite extensive, Emma said finally, her voice carrying genuine admiration mixed with growing understanding of his social position. You must employ considerable numbers of people to manage operations of this scale. 23 permanent hands, more during calving and roundup seasons, Marcus replied, the first extended conversation he'd engaged in during weeks of self-imposed solitude. Jake Morrison handles day-to-day operations as foreman. Good man, knows cattle and can manage crews without constant supervision. Emma nodded thoughtfully, perhaps calculating the implications of joining a household that was essentially a small community unto itself. The isolation that troubled some women might represent safety for someone in her condition, distance from judgmental neighbors and protective anonymity that towns couldn't provide. Yet it also meant dependence on Marcus's character and good intentions in ways that leaving would make difficult if circumstances turned problematic. The ranch house appeared gradually through stands of pine and aspen, its impressive size and obvious prosperity clearly surprising Emma despite her attempts to maintain neutral expression. 3 stories of hand-hewn timber and imported glass rose from manicured grounds, surrounded by outbuildings that spoke to serious agricultural enterprise rather than simple homesteading. The scale suggested wealth that exceeded most territorial standards, comfort that her previous employers might have envied. "It's magnificent," she said quietly as they approached the main entrance. "You've built something truly impressive here. The craftsmanship and attention to detail are remarkable for frontier construction." Marcus considered her words while helping her down from the wagon, noting her professional assessment of architectural features and quality of construction. Her comments revealed familiarity with superior building standards, suggesting employment in households that could afford the finest materials and workmanship. This background would serve her well in maintaining the double diamond standards while adapting to frontier conditions. "Let me show you through the house," he said, leading her toward the front entrance. "You should understand exactly what the position entails before making any commitments. The work isn't difficult, but it requires attention to detail and understanding of proper household management." The interior's grandeur struck Emma speechless for several moments, her eyes taking in rooms that could have graced any mansion in established cities. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating furniture and fixtures that represented both substantial investment and refined taste. Yet her trained eye immediately noticed signs of neglect that spoke to inadequate household management, opportunities for improvement that would justify her employment. Marcus watched her professional evaluation of his domestic situation, recognizing her expertise through the questions she asked and details she noticed. Emma moved through rooms with growing confidence, her assessment becoming more detailed as she identified problems and mentally cataloged solutions. This was clearly work she understood and could perform competently, given proper authority and resources. They climbed to the second floor, where Marcus opened the door to the housekeeper's quarters. The space exceeded Emma's expectations for employee accommodation, well appointed and comfortable with windows overlooking western pastures and distant mountains. A private bathroom represented luxury she hadn't enjoyed since leaving Denver under circumstances she preferred not to discuss. "This is very generous," Emma said, her hand unconsciously protective over her rounded belly as she examined the room's safety and comfort features. "More comfortable than many places I've rented for myself in various cities. The privacy and amenities are beyond what most positions offer." Marcus studied her careful exploration of the space, noting how naturally she assessed its suitability for her condition and coming needs. Her pregnancy was advanced enough to require consideration of birthing arrangements and infant care, complications that most employers would avoid rather than accommodate. Yet something about her dignity and strength made such considerations feel like opportunities rather than burdens. "When is your baby due?" he asked, recognizing that timing would affect both her ability to work and his need to make appropriate preparations. "Late January or early February, according to Dr. Stone's examination when I first arrived in Copper Creek," Emma replied, meeting his gaze directly without embarrassment about her condition. "I understand if that influences your decision about employment. Most people prefer to avoid complications related to childbirth and infant care, especially when the child has no father to claim responsibility. Do you have family who could assist when your time comes?" Marcus asked, though her solitary presence in Copper Creek suggested the answer to his question. Emma's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, pain flickering across her features before she composed herself again. "No family, but I've attended enough births to understand what's required, and Dr. Stone seems quite competent for frontier conditions. I won't be a burden during my confinement and I can continue working until very near my time." Marcus nodded slowly, making calculations that had nothing to do with household efficiency and everything to do with providing security for someone who clearly needed it desperately. This woman required safety more than he needed perfect domestic service, and something about her quiet strength in impossible circumstances reminded him of qualities he'd once valued above personal comfort or convenience. "The position is yours if you want it," he said finally. "We can discuss specific duties and make arrangements for anything you need to be comfortable here. The work schedule can be adjusted as necessary for your condition, and when your time comes, Dr. Stone can attend you here, rather than requiring travel to town. Relief flickered across Emma's features before she composed herself again. Control that spoke to years of learning not to display vulnerability even when kindness appeared genuine. Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. I promise you'll have no cause to regret this decision. I'll earn every dollar you pay me through competent service and careful attention to your household's needs. I'm sure you will, Marcus replied, though he was beginning to suspect that Emma Collins would bring more to the Double Diamond Ranch than efficient household management. For the first time in years, the echo of his own footsteps in empty rooms might be joined by sounds that suggested life rather than mere existence, purpose beyond simple survival. Part 4. The Intervention Decision. The November afternoon stretched long shadows across the Double Diamond's main house as Emma Collins began her assessment of her new responsibilities. Marcus had provided her with complete access to every room, encouraging thorough evaluation of conditions and needs that would guide her work schedule. What she discovered reinforced her growing understanding of a household managed by necessity rather than system, maintained adequately, but without the attention to detail that transformed houses into homes. The kitchen revealed the most obvious neglect, clearly the domain of temporary help who understood basic cooking, but ignored the finer points of organization and cleanliness. Excellent copper pots bore tarnish that proper care would have prevented. The massive cast iron range needed thorough cleaning and seasoning to restore its full efficiency. Pantry shelves showed the disorganization of someone who purchased supplies without considering storage systems or inventory management. Yet the kitchen's potential excited Emma more than its current deficiencies discouraged her. The space was well designed and generously equipped, with modern conveniences rare in frontier households. A hand pump brought water directly to the sink, eliminating the endless trips to wells that characterized most ranch cooking. Multiple ovens and generous counter space would allow preparation of elaborate meals when occasions demanded such efforts. The dining room's formal table remained set with fine china and crystal, as if awaiting guests who never arrived. Dust-covered place settings that suggested habitual solitary dining, a man taking meals alone in a room designed for family gatherings and social entertaining. The contrast between the room's elegant appointments and its obvious disuse spoke to larger questions about Marcus Whitfield's emotional state that went beyond simple household management. Emma's exploration of the main floor revealed similar patterns throughout the house. Rooms furnished with obvious care and expense, but maintained with the minimal attention of someone who derived no pleasure from his surroundings. Books remained unread on library shelves, musical instruments gathered dust in the parlor, and comfortable seating arrangements faced windows rather than each other, suggesting solitary contemplation rather than social interaction. The second floor presented more personal insights into her employer's character and circumstances. Guest bedrooms remained ready for visitors who apparently never came. Beds made with military precision, but clearly unused for extended periods. The master suite's door remained closed, Marcus having indicated that she should focus her attention on areas he actually utilized rather than rooms that were essentially closed to normal household functions. Emma respected his privacy while noting the implications of a man who avoided the most personal spaces in it. Such behavior suggested grief or trauma that made familiar surroundings painful rather than comforting. Her experience in managing households for people dealing with loss had taught her to recognize the signs of depression and withdrawal that often accompanied major life changes. Her own quarters pleased her more with each examination. The room's eastern exposure would provide pleasant morning light, while western windows offered views of pastures and mountains that would never become tedious. The private bathroom included modern fixtures that many townhouses lacked, luxury that made her new position feel more like privilege than simple employment. As evening approached, Emma began her first meal preparation in the Double Diamond's kitchen. Marcus had indicated no special preferences beyond requesting that she cook whatever seemed appropriate, giving her complete authority over menu planning and food preparation. She chose to prepare a simple but elegant dinner that would demonstrate her capabilities without appearing presumptuous about her position in the household. The pantry provided excellent ingredients for beef stew with winter vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie made from fruit stored in the root cellar. These choices reflected her understanding that frontier dining should emphasize substance and comfort rather than elaborate presentation, though proper preparation could elevate simple ingredients into memorable meals. Cooking also provided her with familiar activity during her first day in unfamiliar surroundings. Marcus appeared in the kitchen as she was setting bread to rise, drawn by aromas that had been absent from the house for months. His expression suggested surprise at finding someone actually cooking rather than simply heating prepared foods. The difference between temporary help and professional household management immediately apparent. "Something smells wonderful," he said, maintaining polite distance while clearly curious about her activities. "I can't remember the last time this kitchen was used for serious cooking rather than just basic meal preparation." "Cooking is one of my genuine pleasures," Emma replied, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. "Good meals create comfortable atmospheres that benefit everyone in the household. I hope you'll find my efforts satisfactory compared to whatever arrangements you've been making. I'm sure anything will be an improvement over cold beans and stale bread," Marcus said with self-deprecating humor that revealed more about his recent eating habits than he probably intended. "I'm not particular about food, but I do appreciate meals that taste like someone cared about preparing them properly." Emma noted his comment about caring, recognizing the distinction between mere sustenance and nourishment that acknowledged human dignity and pleasure. Men who lived alone often forgot that eating could be more than fuel consumption, that properly prepared meals could provide comfort and satisfaction beyond simple caloric requirements. Such understanding would guide her meal planning toward foods that nourished both body and spirit. "Dinner should be ready in about an hour," she said, checking the stew's progress and adjusting seasoning according to her taste and experience. "I'll serve in the dining room unless you prefer the kitchen for informal meals." "The dining room," Marcus replied, after brief consideration. It's about time that table was used for its intended purpose rather than serving as an oversized desk for paperwork. His decision suggested willingness to acknowledge her presence in the household rather than treating her as invisible help who should remain separate from his daily routines. The first dinner they shared established patterns that would govern their relationship over the following weeks. Emma served food that demonstrated her professional competence while maintaining appropriate boundaries between employer and employee. Marcus expressed genuine appreciation for the meal's quality without becoming overly familiar or personal in his comments. Both seemed to understand that their arrangement required mutual respect and careful attention to social proprieties. Conversation remained limited to practical matters: household schedules, supply needs, maintenance issues that required attention. Yet beneath these neutral topics lay growing awareness of each other as individuals rather than simply functional roles in a domestic arrangement. Emma's questions revealed intelligence and experience that exceeded typical household help, while Marcus's answers suggested loneliness and withdrawal that went beyond normal bachelor habits. After dinner, Emma cleaned the kitchen with systematic efficiency while Marcus retreated to his study for evening paperwork and bourbon consumption. The routine felt comfortable despite its newness, each person occupying separate spaces while sharing the same environment in ways that suggested potential for developing trust and mutual accommodation over time. Emma's first night in her new quarters brought the deepest sense of security she'd experienced in months. The room's comfort exceeded her expectations, but more importantly, it represented genuine sanctuary from the uncertainties and dangers that had characterized her recent existence. For the first time since leaving Denver under circumstances she preferred not to remember, she could sleep without wondering where tomorrow night would find her. The baby moved restlessly within her womb, perhaps responding to her relaxed emotional state, or simply following its own developmental schedule. Emma placed her hands over her rounded belly, whispering promises about safety and stability that she finally felt capable of keeping. This child would be born into security rather than desperation, raised with dignity rather than shame, protected by someone who genuinely cared about their welfare. Marcus's footsteps echoed through the house as he completed his evening routine, sounds that emphasized the building's size while providing oddly comforting evidence of another person's presence. She'd grown accustomed to solitude during recent months, but loneliness felt different from chosen privacy. Sharing space with someone who respected her boundaries while offering genuine security created possibilities for healing that pure independence couldn't provide. Sleep came easier than it had in weeks, her body finally relaxing completely now that immediate survival concerns had been addressed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she learned the specific requirements of her position. But tonight offered rest without worry, comfort without compromise, peace without fear. For someone who had expected little beyond basic survival, such gifts felt like miraculous abundance. The ranch house settled into nighttime quiet around her, wind whistling through pine trees and distant sounds of cattle moving in their pastures. These noises spoke to the productive activity that sustained the Double Diamond's prosperity, honest work that created value rather than exploiting others' desperation. Emma had found employment in a place where her labor would be respected and her condition accommodated rather than used against her. In his study, Marcus completed his review of cattle reports and market correspondence, but his thoughts kept returning to the evening's dinner and the transformation one person's presence had created in his domestic routine. The house felt different somehow, less like a monument to solitary achievement and more like a place where people might actually build meaningful lives together. He'd made his decision to hire Emma Collins based on impulse and sympathy, but her professional competence and quiet dignity suggested that kindness might be rewarded with genuine improvement in his daily existence. The meals alone would justify her wages, but something about her careful way of moving through his home hinted at changes that went beyond simple domestic efficiency. The bourbon tasted different tonight, less like medication against memory and more like pleasant conclusion to a satisfying day. Tomorrow would test whether this feeling represented genuine progress or merely temporary distraction from problems that required more than household help to resolve. But for now, the echoes of his own footsteps had been joined by sounds that suggested life rather than mere existence, purpose beyond simple survival. Part 5. Establishing new normal. December brought the first serious snowfall to the Pine Ridge Mountains, transforming the Double Diamond Ranch into a winter landscape that emphasized both its beauty and its isolation. Emma had settled into her new position with competence that exceeded Marcus's expectations, her professional skills
evident in every aspect of household management from meal planning to supply organization. The house functioned with efficiency it hadn't experienced since Catherine's death. Rooms maintained properly, and meals served on schedule with attention to both nutrition and presentation. Yet the changes went beyond simple domestic improvement. Emma's presence had broken the oppressive silence that characterized Marcus's daily existence, replacing echoing emptiness with sounds of productive activity and purposeful movement. Her quiet humming while she worked, the gentle clatter of dishes being properly washed and arranged, even the soft footsteps of someone who moved through rooms with careful consideration rather than mechanical routine, all contributed to an atmosphere that felt more like home than monument. The morning routine had evolved to accommodate both their needs and preferences. Emma rose early to prepare breakfast and organize daily tasks, while Marcus maintained his habit of dawn inspection rounds but now returned to hot coffee and substantial meals rather than cold sustenance consumed without pleasure. They shared morning meal and evening dinner in the dining room, conversations limited but comfortable, each respecting the other's privacy while acknowledging their shared domestic space. Emma's pregnancy progressed visibly during her first month at the ranch, her condition becoming more apparent as winter clothing emphasized her changing shape. Yet she continued to perform her duties with remarkable energy and thoroughness, adapting her methods to accommodate physical limitations without compromising the quality of her work. Her experience managing households during various stages of her own condition had taught her to work efficiently while protecting both her health and her unborn child's development. Marcus found himself looking forward to mealtimes with anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. Emma's cooking demonstrated creativity within practical constraints, transforming basic frontier ingredients into meals that satisfied both hunger and more complex emotional needs. Her bread emerged from the oven with perfect crust and texture. Her stews combined flavors in ways that elevated simple sustenance into genuine comfort, and her desserts provided sweetness that seemed to nourish something beyond physical appetite. "You mentioned working in Denver and Salt Lake City," Marcus said during one evening meal, curiosity overcoming his usual reluctance to engage in personal conversation. "What brought you to frontier territory?" "Cities offer more opportunities for someone with your skills and experience." Emma paused in her eating, considering how much personal history to share with an employer who had shown kindness but remained essentially a stranger. "Sometimes circumstances force changes that wouldn't be chosen freely," she replied carefully. "I needed to leave Denver rather quickly, and Copper Creek seemed like a place where someone could start over without too many questions about their past." The response revealed little while suggesting much, and Marcus recognized the diplomatic evasion of someone who had learned to protect sensitive information. Her reluctance to discuss personal details matched his own preference for privacy, creating mutual understanding that some subjects remained off-limits by unspoken agreement. Yet her comment about starting over resonated with his own experience of rebuilding life after devastating loss. "The territory offers that opportunity," he agreed. "Most people here are running from something or towards something, sometimes both simultaneously. What matters is what you build once you arrive, not what you left behind in other places." Emma nodded gratefully, recognizing his acceptance of her need for privacy while offering philosophical framework that made her past irrelevant to their current arrangement. His understanding created space for healing that interrogation or judgment would have destroyed, allowing her to focus on present opportunities rather than past difficulties that couldn't be changed through discussion or explanation. The library became Emma's retreat during evening hours after household duties were completed. Marcus had given her complete access to his collection, and she explored the volumes with obvious pleasure and intellectual hunger. Her reading choices revealed sophisticated tastes and broad interests, from classic literature to contemporary accounts of territorial development, scientific texts to philosophical treatises that challenged conventional thinking about social organization and human nature. "You have an impressive collection," Emma commented one evening as Marcus found her reading Emerson's Essays by lamplight. "Many of these volumes are rare even in established cities. You must have spent considerable effort acquiring such titles for frontier reading." "Catherine collected most of them," Marcus replied, the admission emerging before he could consider its implications for maintaining emotional distance. She believed that isolation shouldn't mean intellectual impoverishment, that frontier life could support cultural sophistication if people made appropriate efforts. The reference to his deceased wife created momentary tension, personal revelation that transcended their employer-employee relationship by acknowledging loss that shaped his current behavior. Emma responded with careful sensitivity, acknowledging his trust while not pressing for details that would cause additional pain. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Emma said softly. "Anyone who valued learning and beauty in challenging circumstances must have possessed exceptional character and vision." Marcus nodded, finding that speaking Catherine's name didn't cause the usual sharp pain, perhaps because Emma's response carried genuine respect rather than pitying curiosity. She believed books could transport people beyond their immediate circumstances, that education remained valuable regardless of geographic location or social conditions. "I share that philosophy," Emma replied, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her rounded belly. "I hope to teach my child that knowledge opens doors that remain closed to those who accept limitations imposed by others' expectations." The comment revealed more about Emma's background and aspirations than she'd previously shared, suggesting education and social awareness that exceeded typical domestic employees. Her pregnancy hadn't dimmed intellectual ambitions but rather intensified them, motherhood representing opportunity to share accumulated wisdom rather than burden that would limit future possibilities. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond household logistics to include topics that engaged both their minds and interests. Emma's questions about ranch operations revealed genuine curiosity about agricultural science and business management, while Marcus found himself explaining breeding theories and market strategies with enthusiasm he hadn't felt for such subjects in years. Teaching her about cattle genetics and seasonal planning patterns provided intellectual stimulation that made evening hours pass more quickly than solitary bourbon consumption ever had. The physical demands of pregnancy forced Emma to modify her work schedule as December progressed, accepting Marcus's insistence that certain tasks be delegated to part-time help from town rather than risking her health through excessive exertion. She resisted such accommodations initially, fearing that reduced productivity might jeopardize her position, but gradually accepted that his concern reflected genuine care for her welfare rather than dissatisfaction with her performance. "You're not being paid to damage your health through overwork," Marcus said firmly when he discovered her attempting to move heavy furniture for thorough cleaning. "Hire whatever help you need for tasks that might be dangerous in your condition. The ranch can afford additional wages, and your safety is worth more than saving a few dollars on temporary labor." His protective attitude surprised Emma, who had grown accustomed to employers who viewed pregnancy as inconvenience rather than condition requiring special consideration. Most previous positions had involved carefully concealing her condition until it became impossible to hide, then enduring disapproval and reduced wages until inevitable dismissal. Marcus's willingness to accommodate her needs while maintaining her dignity represented kindness she'd rarely experienced from people in positions of authority. The Christmas season approached with unusual significance for both residents of the Double Diamond Ranch house. Emma had spent previous holidays alone or in situations where celebration felt inappropriate, while Marcus had avoided festive observances that emphasized family connections he no longer possessed. Yet something about their developing friendship suggested that acknowledging the season might provide comfort rather than painful reminders of loss and loneliness. "Would you like me to prepare special meals for Christmas?" Emma asked tentatively, uncertain whether religious observances held meaning for her employer or represented painful associations with happier times. Marcus considered the question carefully, weighing his inclination to ignore holidays against growing recognition that Emma's presence had made family traditions feel possible rather than torturous. "I think Catherine would have wanted the house to celebrate Christmas again," he said finally. "She always made elaborate preparations, special foods and decorations that transformed ordinary winter into something magical." The decision to acknowledge Christmas represented significant emotional risk for Marcus' willingness to engage with memories that had been too painful to confront since Catherine's death. Yet Emma's careful enthusiasm for the project provided support that made such vulnerability feel manageable rather than overwhelming. Her excitement about creating festive atmosphere infected him with anticipation he hadn't expected to feel again. Emma threw herself into Christmas preparations with energy that surprised them both, her condition seemingly energized rather than limited by the additional activity. She baked traditional foods that filled the house with aromas of cinnamon and vanilla, prepared elaborate meals that honored both religious significance and seasonal abundance, and created decorative arrangements from pine boughs and winter berries that brought natural beauty indoors without requiring expensive purchased ornaments. The kitchen became the center of creative activity, as Emma experimented with recipes that challenged her skills while providing educational opportunities about cooking techniques she'd never attempted. Marcus found excuses to visit during her baking sessions, ostensibly checking on supply needs but actually drawn by the warmth and purposeful energy that radiated from rooms where someone worked with pleasure rather than mere obligation. "You're creating magic in here," Marcus observed, watching Emma roll pastry dough with practiced precision while multiple pies baked in the oven. "The house smells like celebration for the first time in years." Cooking with joy produces different results than cooking from necessity, Emma replied, her flour-dusted hands moving with confident rhythm as she prepared another batch of sweet rolls. "When food is prepared with love and attention, it nourishes more than just physical hunger." Her philosophy about cooking reflected broader attitudes toward life and work that Marcus was beginning to understand and appreciate. Emma approached every task with intention and care that transformed routine duties into expressions of personal values and artistic vision. Her presence in his household had introduced concepts of beauty and meaning that elevated daily existence beyond mere survival or mechanical function. Christmas Eve brought the first genuine blizzard of the season, snow falling with intensity that made travel between ranch buildings dangerous and trips to town impossible. The isolation that Marcus usually welcomed felt different with Emma's company, creating opportunity for extended conversation and shared activities rather than simply enduring weather until conditions improved. They spent the evening by the fireplace, reading aloud from Dickens while wind howled around the house and snow piled against windows. A Christmas carol seems appropriate for the occasion, Emma said, her voice carrying dramatic inflection as she read Scrooge's transformation scene. Stories about redemption and second chances feel particularly meaningful during winter storms. Marcus listened to her reading with growing appreciation for both her dramatic skills and her choice of material. The tale of emotional awakening and renewed connection with human community resonated with his own recent experiences, suggesting parallels between fictional redemption and real possibilities for healing that he was beginning to acknowledge might apply to his own situation. Dickens understood that isolation breeds bitterness while community encourages compassion. Marcus observed when Emma paused to rest her voice. Scrooge's problem wasn't poverty but disconnection from other people's joys and sorrows. Exactly, Emma agreed, her eyes bright with intellectual engagement. Wealth without human connection creates spiritual poverty that money can't remedy. The ghosts show him what he's lost by choosing safety over love. Their discussion of literary themes evolved into more personal conversation about the risks and rewards of emotional investment in other people's welfare. Both had experienced losses that made caring feel dangerous, yet both were discovering that complete isolation carried its own forms of suffering that might be worse than vulnerability to future pain. Christmas morning brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that transformed the snow-covered landscape into sparkling wonderland. Emma prepared a feast that honored both tradition and innovation, combining familiar holiday foods with creative adaptations that reflected frontier ingredients and cooking methods. The dining room table displayed her efforts with pride that made the elegant setting feel festive rather than formal. Marcus presented Emma with a gift that surprised them both with its thoughtfulness. A leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover, accompanied by an elegant fountain pen and bottle of quality ink. For recording your thoughts and experiences, he explained. Everyone should have beautiful tools for preserving their observations about life. Emma's response revealed the emotional significance of his gesture more clearly than words might have conveyed. Tears gathered in her eyes as she examined the journal's fine workmanship and considered the implications of a gift that acknowledged her intellect and creativity rather than simply her domestic utility. "This is the most thoughtful present I've received in years," she said softly. "Thank you for recognizing that I have thoughts worth preserving." Her gift to him was equally meaningful despite its practical nature, a hand-knitted scarf in colors that complemented his winter coat, created during evening hours when she'd claimed to be reading but had actually been working on a project that required considerable time and skill. The warmth of wool was exceeded by the warmth of knowing someone had devoted hours to creating something specifically for his comfort and pleasure. "You made this yourself," Marcus said, examining the complex pattern and even stitches that revealed considerable expertise in needlework. "When did you find time for such elaborate work without my noticing the project?" Early mornings and late evenings, Emma admitted with slight embarrassment about the deception. "I wanted to surprise you with something that showed appreciation for your kindness and generosity. Store-bought gifts seem inadequate when someone has provided genuine sanctuary." The exchange of presents marked a shift in their relationship from employer-employee courtesy to something approaching genuine friendship. Both had invested thought and effort in selecting gifts that reflected understanding of the other's character and needs, demonstrating care that transcended mere politeness or obligation. The emotional intimacy implied by such attention felt both thrilling and slightly frightening to people who had learned to protect themselves through emotional distance. Their Christmas dinner conversation ranged across topics that revealed increasing comfort with personal disclosure and intellectual debate. Emma shared stories about her childhood in a family that valued education and cultural refinement before circumstances forced adaptation to less comfortable situations. Marcus described his dreams for the Double Diamond's future development, expansion plans that had been abandoned when personal motivation disappeared but might be reconsidered if the ranch's success could benefit more than just his own financial security. You could build something that lasts beyond your own lifetime, Emma suggested, her pregnancy making her particularly aware of legacy considerations. Success that serves only individual accumulation feels hollow compared to achievement that creates opportunities for others to thrive. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, recognizing truth in her observation while wondering if he possessed sufficient emotional energy to pursue goals that required investment in other people's welfare and development. Building something larger than personal security would mean accepting vulnerability to loss and disappointment, risks he'd avoided since Catherine's death but might be ready to consider again under the right circumstances. The evening concluded with quiet satisfaction that neither had experienced during recent holiday seasons. Emma's pregnancy made her tire easily, but contentment rather than exhaustion marked her withdrawal to her own quarters. Marcus remained in the parlor longer than usual, contemplating changes in his attitude and expectations that Emma's presence had created without his conscious recognition of their significance. The house felt different as he completed his nighttime routine, no longer echoing with emptiness but filled with the peaceful silence of shared contentment. Tomorrow would bring return to normal schedules and responsibilities, but something fundamental had shifted in the quality of daily existence at the Double Diamond Ranch. Two people who had learned to expect little from life beyond basic survival were discovering that safety shared created possibilities for healing and growth that isolation couldn't provide. Snow continued falling gently outside, adding to accumulations that would keep them isolated from town for several more days. Yet isolation no longer felt like imprisonment but rather like protective shelter that allowed vulnerable shoots of trust and affection to develop without interference from external pressures or judgments. The winter that had once seemed endless now promised time for recovery and renewal that spring would make visible to the outside world. Emma's journal lay open beside her bed, first entry already begun in handwriting that revealed both education and artistic sensibility. December 25th. Today I received kindness disguised as employment, friendship offered without conditions, and hope for the future that extends beyond mere survival. Perhaps this child will grow up understanding that people can choose to care for each other even when circumstances don't require such generosity. Marcus fell asleep thinking about expansion plans that had seemed pointless when pursued for purely personal aggrandizement but might serve worthwhile purposes if they created employment and opportunities for people like Emma who deserved better circumstances than frontier life typically provided. Building something that lasted beyond his own death suddenly felt possible again. Motivation emerging from unexpected sources but carrying the authentic energy of genuine purpose. The blizzard continued through the night, creating drifts that would require several days of clear weather to make travel possible again. Yet neither resident of the Double Diamond Ranch house felt trapped by weather that emphasized their isolation from the broader community. Instead, they had discovered that forced proximity could create opportunities for understanding and connection that normal social interactions rarely provided. Foundations for relationships that might prove strong enough to weather whatever challenges the new year would bring. January arrived with temperatures that froze breath before it left the lungs and snow that accumulated faster than ranch hands could clear paths between buildings. Emma's pregnancy had entered its final weeks, her movements careful and deliberate as she navigated the increasingly demanding balance between household duties and physical limitations. Dr. Rebecca Stone had made the dangerous journey from town twice during the month, confirming that both mother and child remained healthy despite frontier conditions that would challenge any expectant woman. Marcus found himself paying closer attention to Emma's daily routines, noting signs of fatigue or discomfort that she might try to hide rather than admit to needing additional help. His protective instincts had awakened gradually over the months of shared domestic life, evolving from employer's responsibility into something approaching paternal concern for someone who had become essential to his emotional well-being. The thought of anything happening to Emma or her child during birth created anxiety he hadn't experienced since watching Catherine struggle with illness he couldn't cure. Dr. Stone says everything appears normal for this stage, Emma reported after the physician's latest visit. The baby seems positioned correctly, and my health remains good despite the additional strain of winter conditions. She's confident that delivery will proceed without unusual complications. What arrangements need to be made? Marcus asked, recognizing his lack of experience with childbirth logistics while wanting to ensure that Emma received every possible support during her confinement. Should we hire additional help from town? Bring someone to stay in the house until after the baby arrives. Emma considered his offer carefully, touched by his willingness to accommodate her needs but reluctant to impose on his generosity more than absolutely necessary. Dr. Stone mentioned that Mary Catherine Bell has experience assisting with births. If she could stay here for a week or two around my due time, that would provide all the help we should need. The arrangement satisfied Marcus's desire to ensure proper care while respecting Emma's preference for privacy during such a personal experience. Katie Bell was known throughout Copper Creek for her discretion and competence in domestic situations, qualities that would make her presence welcome rather than intrusive during the vulnerable period surrounding childbirth. February's first week brought weather so severe that travel between ranch buildings required ropes strung as guides through blowing snow. Emma's labor began during the worst storm anyone could remember, contractions starting gradually during the early morning hours while wind howled around the house with supernatural intensity. Marcus sent Jake Morrison to town despite dangerous conditions, knowing that Dr. Stone might not be able to reach the ranch if the storm continued, but unwilling to risk Emma facing delivery without professional medical assistance. Katie Bell arrived first, having left town before the storm reached full intensity after receiving word that Emma's time was approaching. Her calm competence immediately relieved Marcus's anxiety about his ability to provide appropriate help during a process he understood only in theoretical terms. Katie took charge of preparing the birthing room with supplies and equipment that Dr. Stone had pre-positioned at the ranch for exactly this situation. Everything looks good, Katie assured Marcus after examining Emma and assessing the progression of her labor. First babies often take their time, but this one seems eager to meet the world. Dr. Stone should arrive well before the birth if she left town when Jake reached her. Emma labored through the morning with remarkable composure, her breathing controlled and her focus intense as contractions grew stronger and more frequent. Marcus found himself pacing the hallways outside her room, alternating between useful tasks and anxious waiting that made him understand how expectant fathers must feel when excluded from the actual delivery process. The sounds of female voices discussing medical details in calm professional tones provided some reassurance that everything was proceeding normally. Dr. Stone arrived just after noon, having made the dangerous journey through weather that should have kept everyone indoors. Her presence immediately increased confidence in the birthing room, medical expertise combining with Katie's practical experience to create the best possible circumstances for frontier childbirth. Marcus retreated to his study where bourbon failed to calm nerves that had been steady through cattle stampedes and range wars, but trembled at the thought of losing someone who had become irreplaceable. The baby arrived during the afternoon's darkest hours, her cries cutting through wind noise with remarkable strength for someone weighing less than 7 pounds. Emma's exhausted laughter mixed with infant protests created sounds of joy that filled the house with life and weight Marcus hadn't experienced since Thomas's birth years earlier. When Katie emerged from the birthing room to announce that both mother and daughter were healthy and strong, relief overwhelmed him with intensity that revealed how deeply he'd come to care about Emma's welfare. "She's beautiful, Doctor," Stone reported when Marcus was finally allowed to meet the newest resident of the Double Diamond Ranch. "Perfect in every way, and Emma handled the delivery like the strong woman she is. Both of them should recover completely with proper rest and nutrition." Emma held her daughter with the natural grace of someone who had anticipated this moment through months of preparation and babies. Dark hair and delicate features created an immediate impression of beauty that would likely develop into striking appearance as she matured. Her alert eyes seemed to study her surroundings with intelligence that suggested she would inherit her mother's quick mind along with her physical characteristics. "What will you name her?" Marcus asked, moved by the sight of mother and child creating their own complete family unit despite the absence of a father to claim responsibility for their welfare. "Rose Catherine," Emma replied, the choice revealing her desire to honor both natural beauty and the memory of Marcus's deceased wife whose books and wisdom had influenced their developing friendship. "I hope she grows into someone who appreciates both strength and gentleness, qualities that seem essential for frontier life." The name touched Marcus more deeply than Emma could have anticipated. Acknowledgement that Catherine's influence continued to shape positive developments in his life despite her physical absence. Rose Catherine Whitfield Collins would grow up surrounded by love and learning, opportunities that her mother's courage had secured through choices that prioritized her child's future over her own immediate comfort. Recovery proceeded smoothly over the following weeks, Emma regaining her strength while adjusting to the demands of caring for an infant in frontier conditions. Marcus found himself eager to help with baby care, despite his lack of experience, volunteering for night feedings and diaper changes that allowed Emma to rest more completely. His awkward initial attempts at holding Rose gradually developed into confident competence that surprised them both. "You're a natural father," Emma observed, watching Marcus successfully calm Rose's crying with gentle rocking and soft singing that revealed hidden talents for infant care. "She responds to your voice and touch as if she's known you all her life." The observation carried implications that both recognized but neither immediately addressed directly. Marcus's paternal behavior toward Rose went beyond employers' courtesy toward employees' child, suggesting emotional investment that transformed their household arrangement into something approaching actual family structure. Yet discussing such developments openly would require acknowledgement of feelings that might complicate their carefully maintained professional boundaries. Spring's arrival brought renewed activity to ranch operations as cattle prepared for calving season and winter damage required extensive repairs throughout the property. Emma resumed her household duties gradually, adapting her schedule to accommodate Rose's needs while maintaining the domestic efficiency that had made the Double Diamond function more smoothly than it had since Catherine's death. The baby's presence added new dimensions to daily routines without disrupting the fundamental order that Emma had established. Marcus found himself looking forward to evening hours when household work concluded and they gathered in the parlor for conversation and reading while Rose slept peacefully in her cradle nearby. These domestic scenes provided contentment he hadn't expected to experience again. Family atmosphere created through choice rather than blood relation, but no less meaningful for its unconventional foundation. "I've been thinking about expansion plans," Marcus said during one such evening, his words emerging from months of consideration about the ranch's future direction. "Not just adding more cattle, but developing programs that could provide employment and training for people who need fresh starts. Women in situations like yours men coming back from war or prison, families who lost everything to disease or economic failure." Emma looked up from her sewing with interest that mixed personal gratitude with genuine curiosity about his vision for creating opportunities that went beyond simple business expansion. "You mean using the ranch's success to help people rebuild their lives rather than just accumulating more wealth for its own sake?" "Exactly," Marcus confirmed, his enthusiasm building as he described plans that had been developing slowly since Christmas but were now crystallizing into specific possibilities. We could build housing for families, provide training in agricultural skills and household management, create a community that supports people while they establish their own independence. The concept represented significant departure from his previous focus on solitary achievement, willingness to accept responsibility for others' welfare that would require emotional investment in outcomes beyond his personal control. Yet Emma's presence had demonstrated that caring for people could enrich rather than threaten his own security. That building something larger than individual success might provide meaning that mere accumulation could never achieve. Rose would grow up in a community that values both achievement and compassion. Emma added, understanding immediately how such development would benefit her daughter's character formation. She'd learn that success carries obligations to help others rather than just privilege to ignore their struggles. Their conversation continued late into the evening, exploring practical details and philosophical implications of transforming the Double Diamond from successful ranch into model community that demonstrated alternative approaches to frontier development. The project would require significant financial investment and personal commitment, risks that Marcus was finally ready to accept because Emma and Rose had given him reasons to care about future generations beyond his own lifetime. As spring progressed toward summer, their domestic arrangement evolved into something that felt increasingly like permanent family structure despite the absence of legal formalization. Marcus's protective attitude toward both Emma and Rose had become obvious to everyone who visited the ranch, while Emma's management of household affairs reflected long-term investment in creating stable environment rather than temporary employment situation. The question of their relationship's future remained unspoken but constantly present in small gestures and daily interactions that suggested deeper connection than employer and employee typically shared. Marcus's willingness to adjust his own routines to accommodate Rose's needs, Emma's attention to his preferences and comfort beyond mere professional duty. Both indicated emotional investment that transcended their original arrangement. Judge Harrison Blake's unexpected visit in late May forced confrontation with external pressures that threatened to disrupt the peaceful stability they had created together. Blake arrived with legal documents and accusations that revealed his knowledge of Emma's past circumstances, information he intended to use for leverage in pursuing his own corrupt interests in territorial development schemes. "Miss Collins," Blake said with false courtesy that barely concealed underlying threats, or should I say Mrs. Patterson. "We need to discuss certain irregularities in your situation here, particularly regarding the child's paternity and your legal status in this territory." Emma's face paled at hearing her former name, but her voice remained steady as she responded to Blake's implicit blackmail. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but my employment here is entirely legitimate and beneficial to both parties involved." "Employment," Blake repeated with skeptical emphasis. "Living in this house, caring for Whitfield's household, raising a child under his protection. Looks more like common law marriage to anyone who examines the situation closely. Could raise questions about moral character that would interest territorial authorities." Marcus stepped forward with anger that had been building since Blake's arrival, recognizing the judge's tactics as extortion disguised as legal concern. "Get to the point, Blake. What do you want, and why should anyone care about your opinions regarding my household arrangements?" Blake's smile revealed the predatory satisfaction of someone who believed he held winning cards in a high-stakes game. "The territorial government is reviewing land grants and ranch operations for compliance with settlement requirements. Unmarried men living with women of questionable background might find their property rights subject to reconsideration, especially if those women have outstanding legal obligations in other jurisdictions." The threat was clear despite its legal camouflage. Blake intended to use Emma's vulnerable status to pressure Marcus into supporting whatever corrupt schemes he was developing, leveraging their relationship to gain influence over the Double Diamond's considerable political and economic power in the territory. Compliance would mean participating in exploitation of other vulnerable people, while resistance could result in losing everything they had built together. "You have 24 hours to consider your options," Blake continued, gathering his papers with theatrical precision. "After that, I'll be forced to file official reports about irregularities that require territorial investigation. Such investigations can take months to resolve, during which property rights remain suspended and residents face potential relocation. Emma's composure finally cracked as Blake departed, tears streaming down her face as she contemplated the possibility of losing the security and happiness she had found at the Double Diamond. "I should leave," she said through her crying. "I won't let my past destroy what you've built here. Rose and I can disappear again, find somewhere else to start over." Marcus took her hands in his, decision crystallizing with clarity that surprised him with its certainty and strength. "No, we face this together as a family. Blake's threats only work if we let fear control our choices instead of making decisions based on what's right and good." His words carried commitment that went beyond protecting an employee from unjust persecution, declaration of emotional investment that transformed their relationship from convenient arrangement into something worth fighting to preserve. Emma searched his face for confirmation of what his words seemed to promise, finding determination mixed with love that made Blake's threats seem manageable rather than overwhelming. "Are you certain?" Emma asked, needing clear understanding of what he was offering before accepting risks that would affect not just her future but Rose's as well. "Fighting Blake means accepting that people will make assumptions about our relationship, that we'll need to define what we mean to each other in ways that can't be changed easily." Marcus's answer emerged from months of growing certainty about feelings he'd been afraid to acknowledge directly. "I'm asking you to marry me, Emma. Not because Blake's threats forced the issue, but because you and Rose have become my family in every way that matters. I want to make that legal and permanent if you'll have me." The proposal came without dramatic gestures or elaborate speeches, offered in the kitchen where they'd shared countless meals and conversations, witnessed by Rose sleeping peacefully in her basket nearby. Yet its sincerity and timing made it more meaningful than any amount of romantic staging could have achieved, authentic expression of love that had developed through shared daily life rather than passionate courtship. Emma's acceptance was equally simple and heartfelt, her yes carrying relief and joy that had been building since Christmas but couldn't be fully acknowledged until external threats forced honest evaluation of their feelings. They were married by circuit preacher 3 days later, ceremony attended by ranch hands and neighbors who had watched their relationship develop with approval and protective interest. Judge Blake's legal challenges collapsed when faced with legitimate marriage and Marcus's willingness to fight corruption through territorial courts that would examine Blake's own questionable activities under detailed scrutiny. The judge retreated rather than risk exposure of schemes that depended on operating without official oversight. His threats proving empty when confronted by people willing to accept risk in defense of principle. The Double Diamond's expansion into model community proceeded through summer and fall, attracting families who needed fresh starts and opportunities to rebuild their lives with dignity rather than charity. Emma's experience managing large households proved invaluable in organizing communal facilities and training programs, while Marcus's business acumen ensured financial sustainability that would allow the project to continue indefinitely. Rose Catherine Whitfield thrived in her new environment, surrounded by adults who valued education and moral development while providing practical skills that would serve her well regardless of what choices she made as an adult. Her laughter filled the ranch house with sounds of joy that had been absent too long, proof that families could be created through love and commitment rather than just biological connection. As winter approached again, Marcus and Emma reflected on transformations that had occurred since her desperate arrival in Copper Creek nearly a year earlier. What had begun as employment arrangement based on mutual need had developed into love story that proved redemption was possible for people willing to risk vulnerability in service of something larger than individual survival. Their success had created opportunities for others to experience similar transformations, the Double Diamond becoming symbol of hope rather than just economic achievement. Building something that would outlast their own lives had given purpose to prosperity, meaning to success that mere accumulation could never provide. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that neither had dared imagine during their darkest moments of isolation and desperation. Together, they had discovered that love shared was stronger than safety hoarded, that building community created security that individual wealth could never achieve, that family could be chosen as well as inherited, and that second chances could lead to happiness greater than anything first attempts had provided. Part 6. Deepening connection March brought unexpected warmth to the Pine Ridge Mountains, melting snow faster than usual and creating muddy conditions that made ranch work challenging but signaled winter's end earlier than anyone had predicted. Emma moved through her daily routines with renewed energy as her body recovered from childbirth. Rose's presence adding purpose and joy to household tasks that had once felt mechanical. The baby's developing personality already showed signs of intelligence and curiosity that promised an interesting future for everyone involved in her upbringing. Marcus found himself spending more time in the main house, drawn by sounds of domestic life that had been absent too long from rooms designed for family living. Rose's cries and Emma's gentle responses, the soft singing that accompanied feeding times, even the practical conversations about infant care created atmosphere that made the Double Diamond feel like home rather than simply successful business enterprise. His awkward initial attempts at helping with baby care had evolved into genuine competence and obvious affection. The library became their evening gathering place after Rose's bedtime, conversations ranging from practical ranch matters to philosophical discussions about child rearing and community responsibility. Emma's intelligence impressed Marcus daily, her insights into complex subjects revealing education that exceeded most frontier women's opportunities. Her questions about ranch operations showed genuine interest in understanding agricultural science and business management beyond mere curiosity about her employer's work. You could expand the horse breeding program, Emma suggested during one discussion about ranch diversification. The quality of your stock is already recognized throughout the territory, and demand for good horses will only increase as more families settle in the region. Marcus considered her proposal with growing respect for her practical understanding of market opportunities and long-term planning. Horse breeding requires different expertise than cattle ranching, more intensive management and specialized facilities. But you're right about market potential, especially for riding horses trained for frontier conditions. Their discussions often continued past his usual bedtime, intellectual stimulation combining with personal comfort to create evenings that felt complete rather than simply ways to pass time until sleep. Emma's presence had restored purpose to rooms that had echoed with emptiness, her thoughtful conversation providing companionship he hadn't realized he'd missed desperately until it returned to his daily experience. Physical attraction had been growing alongside intellectual connection, though both maintained careful boundaries appropriate to their employer-employee relationship despite obvious mutual interest. Marcus's protective behavior toward Emma went beyond professional courtesy, while her attention to his comfort exceeded mere household duty. Yet neither addressed these feelings directly, perhaps fearing that acknowledgement might complicate an arrangement that provided security and companionship both needed. Rose's development provided safe topics for personal conversation that revealed their individual values and hopes for the future. Emma's determination to provide her daughter with educational opportunities reflected her own appreciation for learning, while Marcus's obvious affection for the baby suggested paternal instincts that had been dormant since Thomas's death but remained strong, despite years of suppression. "She's going to be remarkable," Marcus said, watching Rose grasp his finger with surprising strength during one of their evening visits. "Smart like her mother, but with determination that will serve her well in whatever she chooses to pursue." Emma smiled at his praise while recognizing the deeper implications of his investment in Rose's future development. His willingness to discuss long-term plans for her daughter's education and opportunities suggested emotional commitment that transcended temporary employment arrangements, though she hesitated to assume too much about his intentions without clearer indication of his feelings. Part 7, Vulnerability and Trust. April's arrival brought calving season with its demands for round-the-clock attention to cattle giving birth under sometimes difficult conditions. Marcus spent long hours in pastures and barns, assisting with difficult deliveries and monitoring new mothers for signs of complications that required immediate intervention. Emma adapted household routines to accommodate his irregular schedule, ensuring hot meals were available whenever he returned from exhausting work that couldn't be delayed for normal dining times. Her efficiency during this demanding period impressed Jake Morrison and other ranch hands who had observed previous housekeepers struggle with the flexibility required during seasonal emergencies. Emma's ability to maintain household order while accommodating unpredictable demands demonstrated professional competence that exceeded their expectations for temporary help, suggesting permanent rather than transitional arrangements might be developing. One particularly difficult night brought complications that tested everyone's endurance and skill. A valuable breeding cow experienced labor difficulties that required Dr. Stone's veterinary expertise in addition to Marcus's knowledge of animal husbandry. Emma found herself assisting with the emergency, her steady hands and calm demeanor proving invaluable during procedures that might have been overwhelming for someone without experience managing crisis situations. "You're steady under pressure," Marcus observed as they cleaned up after successfully delivering twin calves that had initially appeared unlikely to survive. "Most people get rattled by medical emergencies, but you stayed focused on what needed to be done." Emma's composure during the crisis revealed strength that went beyond household management skills, suggesting experience with difficult situations that had taught her to function effectively when others might panic. Her willingness to help with ranch emergencies, despite having no obligation to involve herself in cattle operations, demonstrated commitment to the Double Diamond's success that exceeded mere professional duty. Their shared exhaustion after the all-night emergency created intimacy that normal circumstances hadn't provided. Barriers lowered by fatigue and mutual respect earned through working together toward common goals. Marcus found himself sharing memories of previous calving seasons when Catherine had helped with similar emergencies, comparisons that acknowledged Emma's competence while honoring his deceased wife's contributions to ranch operations. "Catherine would have liked you," he said quietly as they walked back to the house in dawn light that painted the mountains gold and pink. She appreciated people who could stay calm in emergencies and put animals' welfare above their own comfort. The comment represented significant trust, acknowledgement that Emma had earned comparison to someone whose memory Marcus protected carefully from casual reference or inappropriate associations. Emma understood the honor implicit in such comparison while recognizing the emotional risk Marcus took in sharing personal memories that had remained private since Catherine's death. Their relationship shifted subtly after that shared crisis conversation, becoming more personal as trust deepened through demonstrated reliability under pressure. Marcus began sharing plans for ranch improvements that would require years to implement, including Emma in discussions about future developments as if her continued presence was assumed rather than temporary. Emma responded with suggestions that revealed long-term thinking about the Double Diamond's potential rather than short-term focus on immediate needs. The physical demands of her recent pregnancy and childbirth had left Emma vulnerable to exhaustion that she tried to hide rather than admit to needing assistance. Marcus noticed signs of fatigue she couldn't entirely conceal, her careful movements and occasional pauses during household tasks revealing that recovery was taking longer than she wanted to acknowledge. His growing attention to her welfare reflected concern that went beyond employers' responsibility for employees. "Alf, you're pushing yourself too hard," Marcus said after discovering her attempting to move heavy furniture for spring cleaning despite obvious physical discomfort. "Recovery from childbirth takes time, and you're not doing anyone favors by risking your health through overwork." Emma's resistance to accepting limitations reflected pride and fear that reduced productivity might jeopardize her position at the ranch. Previous employers had been less understanding about physical limitations, viewing pregnancy and recovery as inconveniences that reduced her value rather than temporary conditions requiring accommodation. Marcus's patience with her slower pace and willingness to hire additional help represented kindness she'd rarely experienced from people in positions of authority over her welfare. I don't want to be burdened. Emma replied, her voice carrying anxiety about maintaining usefulness that ensured continued employment and security. I can manage my responsibilities without causing additional expense or inconvenience. Marcus's response revealed growing emotional investment in her welfare that transcended business considerations about household efficiency. You're not a burden, Emma. You're invaluable to this ranch's operation and my personal well-being. Taking care of yourself serves everyone's interests, including Rose's need for a healthy mother. His use of her first name, dropping formal address that had characterized their early interactions, marked another shift toward greater intimacy and personal connection. Emma noticed the change while recognizing its significance in their evolving relationship, boundaries slowly dissolving as trust and mutual respect created foundation for deeper emotional involvement. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.